Congratulations, it's all yours.
I can't believe it. We finally did it. Our new home.
My wife sold our house to her rich boss. He handed me the keys. Every morning, he would wake up to the soft hum of the coffee machine in the kitchen, pour himself a cup of steaming coffee, and sit by the window, watching the neighborhood slowly come alive. Birds chirped in the small trees lining the street, and neighbors would wave as they left for work or school. It was quiet, predictable, and in Mark's eyes, peaceful. He lived with his wife, Laura, in a modest house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Their home wasn't large or extravagant, but it was theirs. The walls had witnessed years of shared laughter, whispered secrets, and quiet evenings spent together watching old movies. Mark sometimes thought of those walls as a diary of their life. Each scratch, mark, or faded spot told a story he held dear. Laura, on the other hand, had always been more ambitious. She worked at a small company downtown, climbing her way up in her career steadily. Mark admired her determination, her drive, and the way she could command a room without raising her voice. But lately, he noticed something had changed. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the shift was happening behind a thin veil. It began with the phone calls. Laura would answer her phone in a hushed tone, smiling at times, frowning at others. She'd walk to another room to talk, leaving Mark in the living room, sipping his coffee, feeling a twinge of unease he couldn't explain. He asked her casually one evening who she was talking to, and she waved it off, saying it was just work-related. Mark trusted her, and he wanted to trust her, so he didn't press further. Then came the late nights. Laura had always worked a full day, but now she was staying longer, sometimes returning after dinner, her eyes tired, her expression distant. Mark would try to engage her in conversation, asking about her day, her projects, or the new clients she was handling. She would nod, smile, or give a short, polite response, and then retreat to the bedroom or the study. Mark noticed the change, but he blamed it on work stress, the kind every ambitious person goes through. The small signs continued. Mark found receipts for coffee shops he didn't recognize, small purchases that seemed unnecessary, and occasionally, he'd catch Laura deleting messages on her phone quickly when he walked by. Every time he considered asking, a small voice inside him whispered, "Maybe it's nothing. Don't create problems where there are none." So he let it go, convincing himself that worrying might only make things worse. Mark's days became a quiet dance around Laura's new routines. He adjusted his schedule slightly to avoid asking questions, hoping she'd open up on her own. But the tension in the house was tangible, even if neither spoke about it. There was an unspoken distance growing, like a slow fog that blanketed the familiar warmth they had once shared. One Saturday afternoon, Mark decided to do some gardening. It had been a long week, and he thought that working with his hands in the soil might clear his mind. As he trimmed the hedges and watered the flowers, he noticed a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, walking by. She was a kindly woman in her 70s who had lived on the street for decades. They exchanged polite greetings and misses. Henderson paused for a moment, tilting her head as if in thought. "You know, Mark," she said slowly, "I saw a few people walking through your house the other day. Were you planning to sell it?" Mark froze mid-motion, the hose slipping slightly from his hands. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. "Well," Mrs. Henderson continued, "I saw some people taking notes looking at rooms. I assumed Laura was just showing the house for a friend or something, but it seemed official." Mark's stomach tightened. He had heard nothing. No mention of an open house, no discussions, no paperwork. He felt a sudden chill despite the warm sun. "Thanks for letting me know," he said quietly, forcing a smile. I didn't realize." After Mrs. Henderson walked on, Mark stayed in the garden, staring at the ground. His mind raced through memories of their life in that house. Birthdays celebrated in the living room, quiet evenings reading books together, even small arguments that had ended with laughter. The thought of anyone else walking through those rooms, making decisions about their life without him, filled him with a strange mix of anger and disbelief. That evening, he tried to talk to Laura casually, hoping to hear that it was just a misunderstanding. "Hey, Laura," he began gently, "did you have someone over today? Mrs. Henderson mentioned some people were in the house." Laura looked up from her laptop, her expression neutral. "Oh, just some colleagues from work, nothing serious." Mark felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to believe her, to trust that it was innocent, but there was a hesitation in her voice, a subtle tension that made his doubts grow. "Just colleagues," he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. Yes, Laura replied, closing her laptop and standing. You don't need to worry about it. But worry had already taken root in Mark's mind. That night, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his head. Each detail seemed to take on new weight. The hushed phone calls, the late nights, the secretive behavior, and now the unmentioned visitors. His thoughts spiraled, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and confusion. He loved Laura, he truly did, but a small voice inside him whispered that something was off. Over the next few days, Mark tried to observe quietly, hoping he might find a logical explanation. He noticed Laura was more attentive at home, but only in bursts. Sometimes she seemed distant, lost in thought. Other times, she laughed and spoke with her usual warmth, and Mark clung to those moments, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. One evening, Mark decided to check the mail. Among the usual bills and advertisements, there was a plain envelope with a bold stamp, "Confidential." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, he found documents he did not fully understand, legal forms regarding the house, signatures, and dates. Mark read the words over and over, disbelief settling like a heavy fog in his chest. The house had been sold. He stared at the papers, unable to comprehend how this could have happened without his knowledge. His life, the home he had nurtured and loved, had been transferred to someone else, someone entirely unknown. His heart pounded, and he felt a wave of anger, fear, and betrayal all at once. When Laura returned that evening, Mark confronted her carefully. "Laura, I found these," he said, holding the papers. "Can you explain?" Laura looked at him, her expression calm, almost detached. I sold the house," she said simply. "It was a good deal. We needed the money." Mark felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "You sold the house without telling me?" His voice rose, a mixture of shock and disbelief. "This is our home, Laura. How could you make such a decision alone?" Laura's face remained composed. "I thought it was the best choice," she said. "It's just business. You'll see, it's for a fresh start." Mark wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand the depth of his pain. But instead, he felt a hollow numbness, a quiet sorrow that settled deep inside him. Their shared life, the memories they had built together, felt suddenly fragile, as if all the walls of their home could crumble overnight. That night, Mark sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the familiar furniture, yet everything felt alien. The house that had once been a sanctuary now seemed like a stranger's possession. He traced his fingers over the worn arm of the sofa, the scratches on the coffee table, and the faint marks on the wall where they had hung family pictures. Each touch brought a pang of loss he could not shake. As the hours passed, Mark realized that this was only the beginning. The calm, predictable life he had once known had shifted. The uncertainty that now filled their home was palpable. And though he didn't yet know what the future held, one thing was clear. The life he had taken for granted was no longer entirely his own. Mark's heart ached with a mixture of love, hurt, and confusion. He understood that life could change in a single moment, and sometimes the people closest to you could make decisions that altered everything. But amidst the pain, there was a flicker of determination, a quiet resolve to face whatever came next, even if it meant navigating a world that suddenly felt foreign and uncertain. Mark felt a heaviness in his chest that he couldn't shake. The papers Laura had left on the kitchen table glared up at him like a harsh reminder of the life he had known and loved. He stared at them again and again, hoping to find some mistake, some detail he had missed. But the truth was undeniable. The house, their home, was sold. Just like that, without warning, without discussion, without him. The next morning, Mark tried to speak to Laura calmly. He wanted answers, clarity, an explanation that made sense. "Laura," he said softly as she poured her coffee, "we need to talk about this." "Why did you sell the house without telling me?" Laura looked up from her cup, her eyes calm but distant. "I thought it was the best decision for us," she said. "It's a good deal. You'll understand once you see the benefits." Mark's heart sank. The benefits. "Laura, this isn't just about money. This is our home, our life. How could you make such a huge decision without even asking me?" Laura shrugged lightly, as if the weight of the situation didn't fully reach her. "Sometimes we have to make hard choices. I did it for us, Mark." "Trust me, trust him." Mark repeated the words in his mind, tasting the bitterness. How could he trust someone who made such a life-changing decision alone? He wanted to scream, to shout, to shake her until she realized the depth of his hurt, but he didn't. Instead, he turned away and left the room, needing air, needing space, needing a moment to breathe. He walked to the small balcony overlooking their backyard. The morning sun was bright, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. The garden he had tended for years looked the same, untouched, perfect, but it felt different to him now. Every flower, every bush, every corner of the yard reminded him of the life he had invested in, the life he had shared with Laura, and the life that was slipping away from him. For hours, Mark tried to understand. He went through their belongings, scanning old photo albums and letters, looking for answers in memories. Each photo brought a pang of sadness: their wedding day, smiling with friends, lazy weekends at home, small family gatherings in the living room. He remembered the way Laura had laughed when they had painted the walls of the nursery, the way she had cried when they first moved in because she felt it was perfect for them. How could all of that be discarded so easily? By mid-afternoon, Mark felt exhausted, physically and emotionally. His mind was clouded with questions and doubts. He remembered neighbors stopping by occasionally, exchanging small pleasantries, and he wondered if they had noticed the tension building in the house. Mrs. Henderson, who had first mentioned the house showings, came over again. "Mark," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you okay? I've seen Laura moving in and out a lot lately, and I couldn't help noticing that things seemed different." Mark shook his head. "Different is right," he admitted, his voice heavy. "I don't even know what's happening anymore. She sold the house without me knowing. I feel like I've been left behind." Mrs. Henderson's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, dear. I know how much you love this house, how much it means to you, but sometimes people make choices for reasons we don't fully understand. You'll find a way forward, I'm sure." Her words offered little comfort, but Mark appreciated the kindness in her tone. He thanked her quietly and watched her walk away, feeling the emptiness of the house more than ever. He had always thought of their home as a shared sanctuary, a place where both of them had equal say, equal investment. Now he felt like a guest in his own life. Days passed, and the tension between Mark and Laura grew. She moved through the house with quiet purpose, as if nothing had changed, while Mark tiptoed around, trying to process the reality. He avoided looking at the papers, avoided speaking to her directly, but the knowledge hung over him like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, Mark decided he needed to confront the situation head-on. He sat Laura down one evening in the living room, the room where so many of their shared memories had been made. "Laura," he began, trying to keep his voice calm, "we need to talk about this. I can't just let it go. I need to understand why you did it, why you didn't tell me, why you made this choice alone." Laura looked at him, her expression steady, almost emotionless. "Mark, I've already told you. It was a good deal. The money will give us options and we can start fresh. I did what I thought was best." Mark felt a rush of frustration. "Best for who, Laura? Best for you? Because I don't feel like this is best for me. This is our life, our home. You didn't even consult me." Laura sighed, setting her cup down. "Sometimes you have to make decisions without waiting for someone else. You'll see, Mark. You'll understand eventually." But Mark didn't understand. He couldn't. How could someone treat their shared life so lightly? He wanted to leave to escape the suffocating weight of betrayal, but he also felt trapped, held back by years of shared memories, love, and commitment. In the days that followed, Mark noticed other changes. Laura was increasingly absent from the house. She spent hours at work or at her boss's office, always returning with a calm, collected demeanor, as if nothing had happened. Mark, meanwhile, became more withdrawn, spending long hours walking through the neighborhood, visiting the local park, sitting on benches and watching people pass by. He replayed the moments in his mind, questioning every interaction, every decision. One evening, he decided to investigate quietly. He called a friend from work who knew Laura casually, hoping to understand if there were other details he was unaware of. The friend mentioned that Laura had recently received an offer from her boss, someone Mark had never met in person. The friend couldn't give specifics, but hinted that it involved significant financial opportunities and benefits. Mark's mind raced. Was this all a scheme? Was Laura being influenced by her boss? He didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. That night, he sat alone in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly shifted under his feet. Then one afternoon, as he returned from a long walk, he saw the moving van outside their home. His heart sank. People were entering the house, carrying boxes, furniture, and belongings he had cherished for years. He wanted to stop them, to shout, to scream, but he felt powerless. The sight of his life being carried away, bit by bit, was almost unbearable. Mark walked slowly to the edge of the driveway, watching as strangers packed the rooms he had known so intimately. Memories flashed in his mind. The first time he painted the living room, the nights they had stayed up talking in the kitchen, the quiet mornings spent reading on the sofa. Each box carried a piece of his past, a piece of his heart, and he felt the ache of loss more deeply than ever. It was then that he noticed a man in a crisp suit, smiling warmly at the movers. He assumed it was Laura's boss, the one who had bought the house. Mark felt a sudden mix of anger and fear. Who was this man? How could someone take their home so casually, so easily, without even knowing them? He wanted to confront him, demand answers, but something about the man's calm presence made him hesitate. Over the next few days, Mark tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible. Laura's indifference and the sudden intrusion of strangers into his home made him feel alienated, isolated, and betrayed. He realized that the person he had trusted the most had taken a step that changed everything, leaving him to navigate the consequences alone. Despite the emotional storm, Mark began to notice small moments of clarity. He started thinking about what he truly wanted, what he could control, and how he might reclaim some sense of agency. Though the house was gone, and though Laura's choices had left him reeling, he realized that he still had the power to decide how he would respond, how he would move forward. One evening, as he sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would face the coming days with courage, even if it meant stepping into the unknown alone. He didn't yet know what the future held, but he understood that life would continue, and he had to find a way to navigate it on his own terms. Mark's journey through betrayal and uncertainty had only just begun. The sale of the house was more than a financial transaction. It was a turning point, a moment that forced him to confront the fragility of trust and the resilience of the human spirit. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Mark felt the first flickers of determination, a quiet strength that would carry him forward, one step at a time. Mark had spent the last few days in a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and quiet reflection. Every corner of the house he once considered his sanctuary now felt foreign. The walls seemed to echo with memories that no longer belonged solely to him, and the air carried the weight of decisions made without his consent. The thought that Laura had sold their home to her boss gnawed at him constantly, making even the simplest tasks feel heavy. He didn't know what to expect when he finally decided to meet the man who now owned his house. Mark had imagined anger, confrontation, and perhaps humiliation. He had rehearsed countless scenarios in his mind, yelling at the man, demanding answers, reclaiming some sense of control. Yet when the moment came, all those rehearsals felt inadequate. He was not prepared for what would happen. The first time he saw him, the man was standing near the front door, holding a set of keys in his hand. He was taller than Mark had imagined, dressed neatly in a suit, but his demeanor was calm and approachable. There was a kindness in his eyes, a warmth that contradicted Mark's expectations. The tension in Mark's chest tightened, but there was also a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man, and why did he feel so different from what Mark had imagined? "Are you Mark?" the man asked, extending his hand. His voice was gentle, friendly, without any hint of condescension. Mark hesitated, then shook his hand, feeling the firm but not overpowering grip. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "And you are?" "I'm Mr. Harris," the man said with a small smile. "I believe Laura sold the house to me. I wanted to meet you personally." Mark's eyebrows furrowed. "Meet me? I don't understand. Why?" Mr. Harris held up the keys, his expression calm. "Because I believe in fairness, and I believe that life's important decisions should involve everyone affected. I know this is difficult, and I wanted to give you the choice to decide what happens next." Mark blinked, unsure he had heard correctly. "The choice? I thought you owned the house now." "Yes," Mr. Harris said patiently, "but owning it doesn't mean I want to cause harm or conflict. Laura's decision to sell was hers, but you're part of this too. I want to make sure you have options, that you feel respected in this process." Mark's mind raced. He had spent days imagining hostility, confrontation, even threats. Yet here was a man handing him the keys with a calm, considerate demeanor, treating him with respect. The contrast was jarring, almost surreal. "Why are you doing this?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why not just take the house and move on? Mr. Harris smiled. Because life is more than ownership. It's about people, respect, and integrity. Laura made a choice, but that choice affected someone else deeply. I don't want to add pain unnecessarily. I want to give you the opportunity to decide your path. Mark stared at the keys in Harris's hand. They gleamed in the sunlight, ordinary yet symbolic. In that moment, they were more than just keys. They represented control, opportunity, and a chance to reclaim some sense of agency in a life that had suddenly felt chaotic and uncertain. He reached out slowly, taking the keys with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I expected anger, confrontation, maybe even resentment, but you're different. That's because I believe in treating people the way I'd want to be treated, Harris said simply. Life is unpredictable. We make choices, some right, some wrong, but respect and honesty should always remain. Mark nodded slowly, his mind spinning with thoughts. He thought of Laura, of her choices, of the betrayal he had felt. He thought of the moving trucks, the empty rooms, the memories packed away in boxes. And yet, here was a man offering him a lifeline, a chance to navigate this storm with clarity and dignity. Over the next few days, Mark spent time talking with Harris, learning more about him and the situation. Harris explained that the sale had been straightforward, a legal transaction handled properly, but he emphasized that his intention was never to hurt anyone. He wanted Mark to know that the house could remain available to him in some way, whether through a lease, a buyback option, or another arrangement that respected Mark's history and investment in the home. Mark felt a mix of relief and confusion. Relief because Harris was reasonable, fair, and kind. Confusion because the situation was so unlike anything he had imagined. He had braced for confrontation, for hostility, for a sense of finality, yet here he was, offered a bridge instead of a wall. During their conversations, Mark began to notice the subtle ways in which Harris demonstrated thoughtfulness. He asked Mark about the house, about the memories contained within its walls, and about Mark's own needs and desires. Harris didn't rush, didn't push, and didn't impose. He listened, and in listening, he gave Mark a sense of validation that had been missing since Laura's decision. Mark also realized something else during these days. He had spent so much time focused on the betrayal and loss that he hadn't considered his own feelings, his own needs, or his own future. Harris's fairness allowed him to pause, to breathe, and to reflect. He began thinking about what he truly wanted, not what Laura wanted, not what society expected, but what Mark himself desired for the next chapter of his life. One afternoon, Mark walked through the empty rooms of the house with Harris. The sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the scratches on the floor, the marks on the walls, and the faint outlines where furniture had once stood. Each room held memories, echoes of laughter, and traces of life lived fully. And yet in the emptiness, Mark also saw possibilities, opportunities to redefine his life, to reclaim control, and to shape his future according to his own terms. "This house has been your home for years," Harris said gently. "I want to make sure you feel respected in the process. If you need time, space, or support, take it. I'm here to help." Mark nodded, a lump in his throat. He realized that Harris's kindness wasn't just about the house. It was about humanity, integrity, and compassion. And in that moment, Mark felt a shift within himself. He no longer felt entirely trapped by betrayal. He began to see that even in difficult circumstances, there could be fairness, there could be choice, and there could be hope. Over the following week, Mark explored different options with Harris. They discussed temporary arrangements, potential buyback possibilities, and even the idea of Mark taking some time away to regroup and plan his next steps. Mark appreciated the transparency, the patience, and the respect Harris showed, which made him feel empowered rather than powerless. Meanwhile, Mark began to reflect on his relationship with Laura. He realized that her choices, while deeply hurtful, were part of a larger narrative, one where people sometimes act in ways that are self-centered or short-sighted. Understanding this didn't erase the pain, but it helped him place it in context. He began to feel less like a victim, and more like someone capable of navigating the consequences, making decisions, and taking control of his life. One evening, after a long day of discussions and reflection, Mark sat on the porch with the keys to the house in his hand. He looked at them, thinking about what they represented, not just ownership, but possibility, resilience, and the power to choose. For the first time since discovering the sale, he felt a sense of calm, a quiet confidence that he could face the challenges ahead with dignity. Mark realized that life often presents unexpected turns, moments that seem unfair or impossible to understand. But within those moments, there can also be grace, opportunity, and the chance to redefine oneself. He understood that while Laura's actions had disrupted his life, they hadn't destroyed him. And Harris's unexpected kindness had reminded him that fairness and integrity still existed, even in a world that sometimes felt unpredictable and harsh. In the weeks that followed, Mark began planning his next steps. He explored options for relocating, considered career moves, and even started thinking about new projects he had long postponed. He found strength in small decisions, from reorganizing his schedule to reconnecting with old friends. Each step gave him a sense of control, a reminder that while some aspects of life might be taken from him, he could always choose how to respond. Mark also started documenting his experiences, writing down his thoughts, emotions, and reflections. It was a way to process the whirlwind of betrayal, surprise, and eventual empowerment. By putting his feelings into words, he felt a sense of clarity and perspective, realizing that the situation, while painful, had also taught him valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and self-respect. Through it all, Harris remained a steady presence. He offered guidance when asked, support when needed, and most importantly, respect at every turn. Mark found himself thinking less about anger and more about the possibilities ahead. He realized that sometimes unexpected kindness can change the trajectory of a difficult situation, turning despair into hope and confusion into clarity. Mark's journey through betrayal, uncertainty, and eventual empowerment was far from over. But the moment with Harris, receiving the keys and being treated with fairness, marked a turning point. It reminded him that even in the darkest times, integrity and compassion could shine through, offering a path forward that was guided not by fear or anger, but by choice and dignity. And as Mark held the keys in his hand, he understood that this was more than a symbol of a house. It was a symbol of his ability to reclaim his life, make decisions for himself, and navigate the future with confidence and courage. The challenges were not over, but Mark knew that he had the strength to face them, step by step, and to create a life that reflected his own values, hopes, and dreams. Mark had spent weeks reflecting on everything that had happened. Laura's sudden decision to sell their home, the emotional upheaval that followed, and the unexpected kindness of Mr. Harris. The days had been long and often lonely, but they had also been transformative. Mark realized that while some doors in life could close suddenly and without warning, new doors could open if he had the courage to walk through them. The first step was accepting the reality of the situation. The house he had once considered his sanctuary was no longer solely his, and Laura's choices had irrevocably altered the course of their shared life. Mark had tried for a long time to understand her motivations, to find some justification for the betrayal he felt, but he came to realize that not every action has a clear or satisfying explanation. Sometimes people act in ways that are incomprehensible, even to those closest to them. And while understanding is helpful, it is not always necessary to move forward. Mark decided that his priority now was himself. He needed to regain stability, rebuild his sense of identity, and chart a path that reflected his values and desires. It was not an easy decision, and it came with a quiet sorrow, but he knew it was necessary. He began by finding a temporary place to stay, a small, comfortable rental not far from his old neighborhood. It was modest, lacking the memories and familiarity of his previous home, but it offered him the space to think, plan, and heal. Moving into the new place was a bittersweet experience. On one hand, Mark felt the sting of loss, the absence of the life he had built with Laura. On the other hand, he felt a sense of liberation, a blank canvas on which he could begin to reconstruct his world. He unpacked his belongings slowly, placing each item with care, reclaiming a sense of ownership over his life and surroundings. Mark also took the time to reconnect with friends he had drifted away from. He reached out to colleagues, neighbors, and old acquaintances, sharing his story in bits and pieces. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. People listened, offered advice, and reminded him that he was not alone. Through these interactions, Mark began to rebuild a sense of community, realizing that life was not solely defined by the walls of a house. but by the people who surround you and the connections you nurture. During this time, Mark also reflected on his relationship with Laura. The feelings of betrayal and hurt were still present, but he began to see them as part of a larger lesson about boundaries, trust, and self-respect. He understood that he could not control Laura's actions, only his response to them. By focusing on what he could control, his choices, his emotions, and his future, Mark began to reclaim a sense of power that had been missing for so long. One morning, Mark received a call from Mr. Harris. "Good morning, Mark," Harris said warmly. "I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know this has been a difficult time, and I want to make sure you feel supported." Mark felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Harris. I'm doing better, slowly but better. It's been hard, but I'm starting to feel more like myself again." "That's good to hear," Harris replied. "Remember, the keys I gave you are more than just a symbol. They're a reminder that you have options, that you have the power to shape your own path. Take your time, make your choices carefully, and trust yourself." Their conversation left Mark with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the keys, which had once represented loss and confusion, now symbolized opportunity and self-determination. He didn't need to rush. He had the chance to plan his next steps thoughtfully and intentionally. Over the next few weeks, Mark explored various possibilities. He considered buying a new home, finding a place closer to work, or even taking a short trip to gain perspective. Each option was weighed carefully, and he consulted with friends and trusted advisors, seeking guidance without relinquishing his own judgment. Through this process, Mark rediscovered his confidence, realizing that he was capable of making important decisions independently and responsibly. One evening, while walking through a local park, Mark paused by a small pond. The water was still, reflecting the fading light of the sunset. He thought about the journey he had been on, the shock of betrayal, the pain of loss, the unexpected kindness of Harris, and the gradual rebuilding of his own life. The reflection in the water seemed to mirror his thoughts. Though life could be turbulent, it was also capable of moments of clarity, beauty, and calm. Mark began journaling regularly, writing down his thoughts, experiences, and goals. This practice became a source of clarity and strength. Each entry allowed him to process his emotions, plan for the future, and reflect on the lessons he had learned. He wrote about trust, resilience, independence, and the importance of surrounding himself with supportive, caring people. Through writing, he discovered a deeper understanding of himself and his capacity to adapt and thrive. As Mark's confidence grew, he began to consider long-term plans. He researched neighborhoods, spoke with real estate agents, and envisioned a new home that would reflect his tastes, needs, and personality. He imagined a space filled with warmth, comfort, and memories yet to be made. For the first time in weeks, he felt excitement and anticipation rather than fear and uncertainty. In parallel, Mark took steps to strengthen his personal and professional life. He focused on his work, taking on new projects that challenged him and allowed him to grow. He reconnected with hobbies and interests he had set aside, from reading and writing to gardening and photography. Each activity, no matter how small, reinforced his sense of identity and purpose. Mark also reflected on his relationships. He reached out to family members, seeking advice and support, and found comfort in their guidance. He spent time with friends, sharing stories, laughter, and the simple joys of companionship. These interactions reminded him that life was not defined solely by hardship, but by the connections, love, and shared experiences that make it meaningful. Through this process, Mark began to heal emotionally. The anger and hurt that had once consumed him gradually gave way to understanding, acceptance, and a quiet strength. He realized that while he could not change the past, he had the power to shape his future. The experience with Laura and the house had been painful, but it had also been transformative, teaching him resilience, self-reliance, and the importance of maintaining personal boundaries. Mark also decided to maintain a respectful distance from Laura. He understood that their paths had diverged, and while he could not undo the past, he could protect his own well-being and focus on his growth. This decision was difficult, but it brought him peace, allowing him to move forward without resentment or bitterness. One afternoon, Mr. Harris stopped by the rental apartment with a small gift, a potted plant. "I thought this might brighten your new space," he said with a smile. "Consider it a symbol of growth and new beginnings." Mark accepted the plant gratefully. "Thank you, Harris. You've done more than you know. Your kindness has helped me see things differently, helped me regain control of my life. Harris nodded. Remember, Mark, life is full of unexpected challenges, but with patience, integrity, and resilience, you can navigate them successfully. The key is to trust yourself and your ability to make good choices. Mark looked at the plant, its green leaves vibrant and healthy. He saw in it a reflection of his own journey, the ability to grow, adapt, and flourish even after a period of upheaval. The metaphor was not lost on him. Life, like the plant, required care, patience, and attention, but it could thrive if nurtured. In the following months, Mark found a new home. It was smaller than the one he had lost, but it was cozy, welcoming, and entirely his own. He filled it with belongings that brought him comfort, memories that reminded him of the lessons he had learned, and items that reflected his personality and aspirations. Each room was a space of renewal, a testament to his resilience and ability to start anew. Mark also continued his professional growth. He took on new responsibilities at work, pursued projects that challenged him, and built stronger relationships with colleagues. The confidence he had regained in his personal life translated into his career, allowing him to excel and find fulfillment in new ways. Perhaps most importantly, Mark embraced the idea of living fully in the present. He no longer dwelled on past betrayals or losses, but focused on the opportunities and joys available to him now. He spent time outdoors, nurtured friendships, pursued hobbies, and cultivated a sense of gratitude for the small, everyday moments. Looking back, Mark recognized that the sale of the house and Laura's choices had been a turning point. They had forced him to confront difficult emotions, challenge his assumptions, and ultimately grow in ways he had not anticipated. The experience had been painful, but it had also revealed his strength, resilience, and capacity for self-determination. As he settled into his new home, Mark reflected on the journey he had undertaken. The keys from Mr. Harris, once a symbol of confusion and uncertainty, now represented opportunity, empowerment, and hope. He had learned that life could change in an instant, but with patience, courage, and integrity, it was possible to reclaim control and create a future that reflected one's values and dreams. Mark understood that his story was far from over. Challenges would arise, unexpected situations would occur, and life would continue to test him. But he had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating whatever came his way. He had discovered that resilience was not just about enduring hardship, but about embracing change, making thoughtful choices, and nurturing personal growth. Sitting in his new living room one evening, Mark looked around at the space he had created. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow on the walls. The potted plant from Harris thrived on the windowsill, a living reminder of growth and renewal. Mark felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet contentment that came from knowing he had faced adversity, learned from it, and emerged stronger. He realized that the journey he had undertaken, from betrayal and loss to clarity and empowerment, had taught him invaluable lessons about life, trust, and self-respect. He knew that while the past could not be changed, the future was entirely in his hands. And with that knowledge, Mark felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, confident in his ability to create a life filled with purpose, joy, and fulfillment. Mark's story was no longer one of loss and betrayal. It had become a story of resilience, transformation, and hope. And as he held the keys to his new home in his hand, he knew that he had reclaimed not just a place to live, but a sense of control, dignity, and the power to shape his own destiny.